Welcome to The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Stuart Reynolds, aka Brittlestar, almost daily captures the zeitgeist of Canadian culture online. And with millions of views on YouTube, Twitter, and other top platforms, is a savvy content creator, digital strategist, keynote speaker, and social media consultant. Brittlestar is my very special guest on this episode of The Voice of Retail. We talk social media tradecraft, his love for Zellers and consumers distributing, and actionable advice on how retailers can be consistent and successful with their social media strategies.
You know, I think I related to that idea of like, I want to be able to tell the world who I am.
Right.
And that's certainly a huge thing on social media right now is like, and this point in history is really explaining to people, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I think about things. This is what I support. And that's a major consideration for people now, maybe more than ever in history, to tell strangers who they are and how they feel about things. And they do that. One of the ways they do that is by using social media content. And that's how memes are so successful. That's how my videos can get successful.
Let's listen in now. Stuart, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm just fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very excited to talk to you, or should I say Brittlestar. We'll get into this this meme or this social media identity, this whatever thing you've created. It's really amazing, and thanks so much for joining me. This is going to be an interesting interview because it's it's an exploration of what you've done so well and your observations, and I think the retailers and the listeners are really going to enjoy it. Let's jump right in. So, tell us about yourself and your personal professional journey and what you do today and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, most people will know me best as Brittlestar from social media. And what I've been doing for the past 8.5 or so years has been creating content on social media, starting on Vine, the old 6.5 second looping video application. Yeah. And that's kind of, we got our start on that and sort of gained some success and ended up working with a bunch of brands. And so now my time is kind of split between creating content that's just sort of original content, sort of put out there for people's enjoyment, hopefully. Yeah. And along with some brand work where I work with some, I've worked with some top tier brands and be able to create content in my own style, but with their messaging and that kind of stuff. So it's a weird job to have because I started when I was 43 doing this. I was
going to say, it's not exactly a linear career journey.
No, it is not. I can think back to when I was, I did a talk for some grade 8 kids early on in my social media career. And right before me, the principal was saying, well, kids, if you want to do this kind of trade job, you go this direction. If you want to go this kind of job, you go this direction. And then I got up and I was like, yeah, kids, my job didn't exist 6 months ago. So, keep your doors open.
Well, how did you find your way there? I mean, were you in business? Were you a professional entertainer? Or were you something a little bit of both? How did you kind of come to this as a gig?
Well, I mean, I've always been involved in music. So, I mean, entertainment in general has kind of always been a thing for me. And I've been, when I was 16 and stuff, we were doing, record company interviews and performing and all that kind of stuff. So it's always been a big part of who I am. And then also, at the same time, sort of balancing that has been this super interest in becoming self-employed and running my own business. And I've been doing that since I was 19. I started with, I created my own jingle writing company and jingle production company for radio stations. And so that idea of, creating messaging in a jingle that was going to hook people in the first 7 seconds, well, that apparently translated very well into Vine, which was 6.4 seconds.
Right.
So, it was my youngest son, Gregor, who was 11 and watched a vlog about this new app called Vine and said, Dad, you got to check this out. It's like the video version of Twitter. And so I just started messing around with it. And we were in such a place at that point where, we were like, it was fiscal disaster for us at that point. Our business had collapsed because of a catastrophic hack in 2008.
Oh my goodness.
And then the recession, of course, was happening at the same time.
Double jeopardy.
Exactly. Which we had about sort of 6 different attempts at getting out of that situation that just didn't work. I was doing some voiceover work, and then just to basically keep myself sane and happy, I started creating these videos on Vine, and they found an audience, which I'm forever grateful for.
So tell me about Brittlestar, the identity you have, and why did you create that as an identity? What was your strategy behind that?
The strategy behind that was based way back in the music days. In 2004, I was 34 years old, and I was like, well, if I've been waiting for someone to tell me I'm allowed to make an album, and no one's come along and said that yet, so I'm just going to make one. So I ended up connecting with a guy named Stephen Duffy, who was one of the founders of Duran Duran, if anyone knows the band, and lots of success with Robbie Williams and the Brand New Good Ladies and all that kind of stuff. And he helped me sort of craft this first record. And as I was doing that, I was like, well, no one's going to buy an album by Stuart Reynolds. Like, who's going to wear that T-shirt? Not me. And but I would wear a T-shirt by like a cool band name. And so my oldest son, Owen, had a marine life book when he was about 3. And we would read it before bed at night. We'd go through all the little animals and all that kind of stuff. And we'd get to these weird spindly starfish called brittle stars. And they can see, and I'm air quoting that, through their tentacles, and they defecate out of their mouths. And I was like, this is perfect. This sounds like a great name. It's a great band name. And then like when that sort of social stuff came around afterwards, it was like, well, I've got all the domain names. I've got all the social accounts. I'll just stick with those, as opposed to like trying to teach people who Stuart Reynolds is. I'll just keep on with Brittlestar, and it's easier to remember. Plus it looks good in a T-shirt.
And it tells a story when you go look you up on Wikipedia, for sure. That's a tough one to cap. Talk about the inspiration for your work. I mean, as I've observed you, some of the work seems like something's happened to me and I'm just going to do content about it. And other things seem more kind of deliberate or planned out from a content strategy. And where I'm going with this is, many retailers, when I've been asked them, particularly during the COVID era and beyond, social media has taken on such an important role in their marketing and their identity and their the customer experience. But it's kind of new to them. When do I create content? How do I create content? What's that vibe? And tell us about how you approach it, like from a blank sheet of paper all the way to something that really seems to be catching on in this kind of meme way.
Well, I think what's interesting to me about social media content and content creation is that there are so few shared experiences we have now. And, there's a fantastic term, another Duran Duran reference, funny enough, which is weird, in a lyrics by Simon LeBlanc, where he says he refers to people with their iPods and headphones in as sonic islands. And it's very, very true, though. It's very much like an idea of like everyone's in their own little universe and stuff and very isolated, so that you have like algorithms who are curating content that you want to see. Right. And it's not necessarily the content that's just out there being created. It's just the stuff that it thinks you want to see anyway. And then you also have everyone in their headphones. You've got everyone on their phones. You've got, everyone's kind of a little bit of a sonic island. And so there's few shared experiences. And I think that one of social media's best aspects is that it can be used to connect people in that shared experience way. Like if there's something happening, the most obvious example, of course, is the pandemic. Is that, it's not a case of just entertaining people. It's not a case of just blasting out information to people. It's about saying to people, hey, look, I'm going through this and you probably are going through this as well. And that can be anything from as serious as, the pandemic, right down to as silly as, doing a song about Zellers. And it's that's
love that, by the way.
Well, thank you.
And I can tell you, just because I shared it with a bunch of people, the former CEOs and presidents of Zellers all loved it too.
Oh, fantastic!
Because I used to work at Zellers. I worked at HBC, and I can tell you, George Heller, who was the president at the time, Thomas Haig, they just loved it.
That's great. That's fantastic.
Of course, they like to stick it to Target too, right? Really. I remember I was at a conference, big retail conference, and one of the former presidents got up, and Target had just left Canada, and he said, so how many people in the room are at one time worked for Zellers? Of course, big company, right? So a lot of them go up, and he goes, "How do you feel about us now?" And it was kind of a roar of approval. That set his keynote off very well.
Well, there was just such a Canadian aspect to that whole saga between Zellers and Target of having that sort of notion of, you don't know what you've got till it's gone, basically. And it's just that idea of, Canada's so good at putting itself down and lauding and grass is greener across the border sometimes. But then it's like, no, we had it pretty good.
Moving Target. I mean, you nailed it. Moving Target. I'm going to put a link to that in case anybody hasn't seen it. Moving Target. It's pretty funny. Even, you don't know necessarily the backstory, but the president of Zellers, Thomas Haig, went and became the president of Giant Tiger. So there's even a Giant Tiger reference.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, exactly.
In the song, right?
Yeah, there's another one I'm working on currently about consumers distributing. So just to let you know, that's a scoop. So
there we go. There's a scoop on. So you take content, you create content. I love what you're talking about. I mean, but social media is both, and I'm very conflicted about social media on any given day. I mean, it is both the somehow, some way, it is both the biggest risk to our society and at the same time the most liberating part of the internet. So I'm very conflicted about it on any given day. So you're right about that. Social, you're in this sometimes virtuous but sometimes a negative loop, right? It's just going to reinforce hopefully good things, but it also can reinforce not so good things. So how do you manage through that? I mean, you take that positive, you create content and you put it out there.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think one of the things, someone was asking what my New Year's resolution was, and I was like, my New Year's resolution, which I don't really do, is really usually ridiculous, like I want to swear more and that type of thing. But my New Year's resolution was to amplify good. And I think that's the key, is that social media is really good at making you think some things or issues are really loud and some voices are super loud. And
for good or ill, right?
For good or ill, exactly. Yeah. And I think you have to be savvy about it and realize that, just because I have a saying that says the loudest person in the room is usually the dumbest. And it's held true to this so far anyway. And I think that, you have to find those good stories and you have to amplify those good stories and those good connections, because you can make as much noise as the bad stuff. And I think that's really important. And I think it's super easy. And I think one of the things that I despise about social media, and it doesn't apply to every platform, it especially applies to Facebook, is that, as I call it, the Facebook anger rhythm. It's, I have a video on there that's explaining Canada Day to Americans, and it does really well. And I think it's sort of 55 or 60 million views or something.
Crazy.
And
congratulations.
Well, thank you.
I produce a bit of content myself, and those views are so impressive. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, it was phenomenal. And, but the thing that it's really annoying about that is because every year it'll go up another few million. And, I put it out in 2017. And, I know that if I want to get good views on Facebook and good numbers, I need to put something contentious that's going to make people angry.
The anger algorithm, right?
The Facebook anger rhythm. And it's just a case of, that's the worst part of the algorithms for social media, is that they think that engagement equals good. And it's like, well, it doesn't always, you know what I mean? Like all you're doing is creating a mob.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could have a whole separate podcast on, can we turn the clock back? Can we put the toothpaste back in the tube, or the champagne cork back in the bottle? Let's talk about your tradecraft a bit. What advice or best practices have you had? I mean, you're getting millions of views. I mean, I can imagine you get a call from an agency or a client saying, "Could you create a viral video for me?" I'll do 10 of those yesterday.
Super easy.
It's super easy. Tick. Yeah, I know the formula. But you've come close to at least close in proximity to understanding how to approach the formula, at least in terms of, how to get video that people will watch on a positive. So share a bit of your insights around that, insights and experience, because you're both working, as you said, on your own and working for clients.
So I think, what's important to realize is that the social media landscape is more like a social media seascape, and it's kind of constantly churning and changing directions. And there's a million or billions of factors involved, from everything from, the algorithm of the platform to what's happening in the news cycle to, what ridiculous distractions happening somewhere else. And what's happening in the world off social media as well as impacts that. I think the key for social media content to do really well is it has to be part entertainment, part utility. I think it has to be useful to the viewer in the sense that at the least they can look at that piece of content and go, this expresses how I feel. So I can use this to let other people know how I feel. I often relate it to, back in the day when you would have your CDs or cassettes in the car and you give someone a ride in your car, you only had the cool ones on display. The ones that you were like your guilty pleasures were in the center console or they were in the glove box.
Yeah, Sega was in the glove box.
Well, maybe not Sega. Come on now.
Okay, Styx maybe.
Yeah, Styx is exactly. Just when it's you in the car and the road and come sail away. And, I think I relate it to that idea of like, I want to be able to tell the world who I am.
Right.
And that's certainly a huge thing on social media right now is like and this point in history is really explaining to people, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I think about things. This is what I support. And that's a major consideration for people now, maybe more than ever in history, to tell strangers who they are and how they feel about things. And they do that. One of the ways they do that is by using social media content. And that's how memes are so successful. That's how my videos can get successful, is because people go, yeah, this is how I feel.
Right.
So they have to have the entertainment aspect and they have to have utility as well.
Is there what role is consistency play in terms of production? I mean, is it important for us to be consistent in terms of how and when we put out, or is that over thought through?
I mean, I think that's kind of the idea that you can enter this market of the market that's been based on abandoning appointment viewing and say, I'm going to set up an appointment for you to view this every week is nonsense. I think that, consistency is good in the sense that,
I mean, you can't go months with it. You can't post something and then go weeks without posting.
No, exactly. Right? So it's not so much. There's not a magic number, but you do have to. You're maintaining profile. It's the old adage of, if Coca-Cola stopped advertising for a day, their sales would drop 10%. And everyone's like, everyone knows about Coca-Cola. Yeah. But it's just profile. It's just basically like there's a sea of information.
Top of mind stuff, right?
It's totally top of mind, and it's just you're just there, and it is impossible to saturate the internet. You just cannot do it. It cannot be done. It's even that nonsense of back a number of years of Kim Kardashian breaks the internet. No, she didn't. It's there's nothing. It's just, there's still people that have no idea. There's people who follow me who've been like, did you make a video? And you stopped making videos? I haven't seen any in a while. And it's like, are you kidding? I made like 5 last week.
Now, when you make your videos, you make your content, and this is maybe not the fairest question, but you kind of rank them 1 to like, I like it, 5 to like, I'm this is amazing. And maybe there's a 0, 1, like that one didn't work out the way I want. Do you kind of say, listen, I'm only going to do the 3+, or do you put them all out kind of happy with, do you ever just do something? And again, I'm trying to, understand the creator's perspective around, listen, that didn't work out the way I think, but I'm still going to launch it because I want to be consistent. Or is there that kind of, nope, I'm not going to put it out because it just didn't, I don't think it's going to be that successful, or I'm not, thrilled with it or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be savvy about it. I mean, you have to take consideration about what you're putting out there. I'm a big believer in the notion that, I'm trying to say this in the least gross way possible, but that ideas for content are like movements, shall we say. And you can't skip to the next one because you might be better. You still have to get that one out first, and then you can go on to the next one.
Right.
So I think that idea is, you have to keep creating, you have to keep doing stuff. And even if the idea, you're like, I'm not sure if it's going to work. Sometimes those are the ones that work great and you're excited to get them out. And other times you get through an idea you think it's going to be amazing. You start out and you go like, you know what, this just didn't hit. But now it's out and it's done and it's out of my head and I can move on to the next one and be better about it. But consistency as far as scheduling, no. As far as maintaining top of mind, absolutely.
Let's talk about the COVID era, the past 18 months. You've been doing this for a long time, really a social media veteran. In your mind, has anything changed with the way people consume the social media? And I guess I always try to get to, well, there's, of course, 18 months of very unusual behavior. Is anything going to change structurally around how people consume media? So, for example, retailers are thinking now that particularly apparel retailers, Instagram is more important than it ever was because more people shopped online and then bought in the store. Is that going to stick? This is the big $1 billion question that we're all asking ourselves,
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see, and I really don't know how things will transpire as we come out of the pandemic. But certainly, the effect of the pandemic, looking back on it, it's evident that, prior to the pandemic, for social media's focus, we used to take social media into our world. And when the pandemic hit, social media became our world. And that had a number of things, sort of happen because of that. And I don't know if they're going to stick or not. But one of the things was, I think that there's a super big blur between what was happening entertainment-wise on social media and what was happening entertainment-wise on traditional media. And I think that people started to see it a little differently, as opposed to prior to the pandemic. People would see like, well, it's a social media star, and this is a TV star. Right. And I think that mattered less during the pandemic. It was like, I'm getting my entertainment any way I can get it.
Yeah. They weren't if I'd summarize you, they weren't making that qualitative difference. Like, entertainment is entertainment.
Exactly.
No matter the media that I'm consuming it on, right?
One of the things I've really noticed, which is interesting, is that there's been, and it'll be interesting to see if it holds up, because traditional media is such a massive industry that it's not going to let up control easily, and it doesn't change easily. But I've noticed there's kind of been a leaning towards more, for lack of a better word, authentic looking productions, as opposed to overblown glitzy productions. I think that you look at some shows that are, essentially really, really Americanized, high gloss type productions. And it's not even just shows, but ads and everything. Yeah. And they just don't hit as well anymore, because people are like, well, I just had a year and a half of people talking directly to me on their phone.
That's interesting.
And then now you're just going back to like pretending I'm just, like you're talking to kind of the middle distance now. Like I'm right here. So it'll be interesting to see if that sticks or if that changes. I'm really not sure what's going to happen with that, but it'll be super interesting.
Well, I think we all still have a yearning for that, Dune style production, right? That take me to another world at a level that's beyond, with all the tradecraft and professionalism.
For sure.
But then there's that authenticity, right? And I guess you're trying to walk those two, that fine line. Last question for you, second last question, but tell us about 2 starts and 1 stop that you would advise clients and retailers listening around their use of content on social media. Two things they should start doing, and 1 thing that maybe just doesn't work anymore, or maybe you see them doing too often.
So the 2 starts, 1 stop. So 2 starts. So the first start would be for businesses and brands and such, in regards to social media, to people know there's a person behind the account. So you don't have to be, glossy all the time. You don't have to pretend things aren't happening. You don't have to be super arm's length with this. You're entertaining first, is the idea. And the other start would be, I would start, oh man, that's a hard question. From my perspective, I think I would start, if I was a business or a brand.
Would you start a TikTok account? Are you
I think you should start. I think you should start every account you can, and I think you should start realizing that social media isn't just a job you give to the intern. It's not just a job you give to, even though some interns are great. It's a full-time job, and it's not a full-time job. Like, you can't just say to one person, take care of our TikTok account, our Instagram account, our Twitter account, our Facebook account, our YouTube channel. That's each one of those is a job on its own. You look at some of the successful accounts and social accounts and brands like Wendy's or whatever, KFC UK or something. And those people are professional entertainers, for lack of a better term, or writers. Yeah. And that's all they do, is they put out information that has got their messaging, and then they
for the right media, right? For that interesting idea that look, because we know Twitter, for example, it's its own thing, right? It's a very different medium, right? You can't just pick up a YouTube video and slap it on.
No, exactly.
Twitter. And I think the other thing you raise, which is really, really great, because that's always the way I've approached it. It's just because, you might have a young intern who themselves is on social media. That doesn't mean they get social media or content creation strategically.
No, exactly. You're absolutely right. You could luck out and you get an amazing intern who does an amazing job. But at the same time, that notion of, you're already saying it's not that important to us by just sort of throwing it off to someone saying,
you're on social media. You must be good at it.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Just post some tweets and just
I see all the pictures. Do whatever.
It's like, well, really? And my thing with working with brands has always been, what's the last ad that you shared? You know, and that's the rule. And it's like, if the ad is funny, and there's been ads that I've shared, but I don't share them unless they're providing something beyond the messaging. They have to provide entertainment. Like I'm asking people for their time. So what are they going to get in return?
We're kind of encroaching on the stop, which is don't hire someone just because they use social media to do your social media. Anything else that comes to mind that maybe it's something that's changed over the past 18 months? Maybe it's that thing you need to correct everyone on, or just point them in the right direction? Any thoughts?
I think I would stop using social media as a bulletin board as well. And I think that I'll add on to that or augment that point by saying, stop using social media as a bulletin board / not everything has to be a conversation. So there's a weird sort of balance there where you don't have to dance with every idiot is my rule. And at the same time, putting up information that offers nothing to no one, only for your own benefit, like, who cares? That's a scroll. Like, I'm moving on. You know what I mean?
I mean, the risk there is you say, well, I need to publish something twice a week. I don't know what to talk about. I'm just, I need to tick a box, right? So, maybe you skip that box if you don't have anything really interesting.
Yeah,
it could do more harm than good. Do you think sometimes?
I think potentially you just seem a bit oblivious and a bit tone deaf sometimes. I mean, there's nothing worse than a scheduled tweet that goes out in the middle of a major, major news event, and you're like, dear God, like, read the room. I feel terrible for this, but Sesame Street has individual social accounts for all their characters. I don't know if you know that or not, but it's fantastic, and I follow them and I love the Muppets. And the Count, 1, 2, he has his own account, and all he does on Twitter is count. That's it. He just so every tweet is just like the next number in his however many he's done. He's over 3,000 now. And it's hilarious and it's fantastic. But when the shutdown hit in March of 2020, I replied back to the Count, read the room.
Yeah.
And he stopped for months, and I felt terrible.
Oh my
I was like,
goodness.
what have I done to this poor little Dracula Muppet? But then he's back now, so that's good. Yeah. But that idea of, if you can't just schedule stuff out, and it's like walking into a funeral and being like, have you guys heard the new such and such album? It's like, no, that's not how. You got to figure out where you are first. And
maybe the Count could count vaccination numbers or something.
Exactly.
Useful. Wouldn't that be great? All right. So you've got tremendous social media presence. So usually my last question is, where can people find you? So as Brittlestar, they can find you on their favorite platform. But you also, as you mentioned, do some work and help people figure out their ways around all this social media with your experience. How do they get in touch with you, and how do they learn more about that?
So they can find out more about me at brittlestar.com. And of course, if they do follow on social, on Twitter or whatever, they can always just message me there, and I'm happy to, or tweet at me or something, and I'm happy to respond if I can. And it's been a weird, wild ride as a middle-aged suburban weirdo, and but long may it continue.
Yeah, right on for that. Listen, Stuart, congratulations. I mean, I wish you much continued success, and I'm a big fan, so this is a fun experience for me. But I think it's also a great learning experience. Thank you for sharing your insights, and thanks for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. And again, I wish you much continued success and a great rest of your summer.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts, so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of LeBlanc Company Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.